Sex addiction has been variously described. First of all, there's a huge controversy in the mental health field about whether or not it is an addiction.
Right.
After I talk about the 4 characteristics, I hope the listeners will get a sense that it is a viable addiction. The founder of our field, Dr. Patrick Carnes, calls it a pathological relationship with a mood-altering substance. And if something is going to be an addiction, it has to alter your mood. That's one of the characteristics we'll talk about here in just a moment. To me, it's one of the things for the average Christian listener to listen to about this is that we don't define sexual addiction or any addiction based on a concept of sin, so that there is a distinction between, behaviors that might be sinful in the eyes of your sense of morality, but they may not be addictive. Likewise, there may be addictive things, even sex and marriage, that could be highly on the addiction scale, but they may not be considered as sinful. So one of the first things to think about is take away the equation between sexual sin and sexual addiction. The 4 characteristics that we think of, and these are kind of a shortened version of the diagnostic criteria. The first one is that for anything to be classified as an addiction, certainly sex, or you can think about food or gambling or other kind of behavioral addictions, we have to have some sense that the pattern is what we would call unmanageable, that there's a sense of powerlessness about it. And basically, powerlessness has been simply defined as that wanting to stop a behavior and the inability to stop. So that, your average addict has said thousands of times, I want to stop doing this or that, and they haven't been able to. In the first step of Alcoholics Anonymous, alcoholics and now sex addicts say, I admitted I was powerless over lust and my life had become unmanageable. The second thing, and this is what makes it medically viable as an addiction, is that for something to be called an addiction, it has to create in the human brain what we call neurochemical tolerance. And that basically means that whatever we put into our brain, substance-wise, our brain will adjust and want more of that same substance to achieve the same effect. So an alcoholic over time knows that 1 beer is not going to get them drunk. They need 2, then 6, then 12, then 24. They may need to go from beer to harder liquor. The same would be true of nicotine addicts or cocaine addicts, or you need more of the same to achieve the same effect. Number 3, if there is that neurochemical tolerance effect with an addiction pattern, we need to see it progress. We need to see it start at some point. We need to see over time that the addict is getting worse. They're doing it more often. They're graduating to new and more problematical or sinful or dangerous behaviors. This progression pattern could be over years, it could be over weeks. The internet coming along since the mid-90s has escalated the rapidity of this escalation pattern more than anything I've seen. So, we can see a firmly developed addict to internet pornography in about a month's time. Some of the older stuff, masturbation and looking at print pornography, that may take months and even years. Then the final criteria is that we need to see that the addict is using the neurochemistry to manage their mood, to deal with their feelings. So when you think about the rush of adrenaline and dopamine on the front end of even thinking about sex, that's mood elevating. When you think about the neurochemicals associated with having an orgasm, even through masturbation, that has a mood suppressant or a mood depressing quality to it. So there's definitely a mood cycle to any addiction pattern, and certainly with sex addiction. So those are the 4 criteria that we think about. So if a person can say to himself, look, I've tried to stop this any number of times and can't. I noticed that I've needed more to achieve the same effect. I've seen an escalating pattern, and I know that I use this to manage my mood. If a person could say yes to those kinds of things, then they would probably want to seek out some professional help. How would you notice it? Here's a criteria that I find fascinating, and that is that you can notice some of the obvious things, like a person seems preoccupied with sex. They're always wanting it, seem like they're pursuing it, talking about it, introducing it into the conversation. You're noticing things, you're finding secret this, you're seeing emails come in that don't make any sense. My favorite one, because I was guilty of it, is the use of sexual humor. Sex addicts they're great with innuendo and sexual sarcasm, and they introduce sexual jokes into the conversation quite a bit. And all of that can be an indication of sexual tension that they're having in their life. If you're married to a sex addict, you will notice that they can be one of two extremes. They can be always demanding, always wanting it, never completely satisfied, wanting you to do increasing things, watch pornography with them, engage in new sexual practices. That's one side of the spectrum. On the other side would be the person who we call sexually anorexic in the marriage, and that's because they're acting out outside the marriage, and they're with themselves or with others, and they're looking at pornography, whatever they're doing, and they don't seem at all interested in sex with you. Either side of that spectrum, that continuum, could be a person who's in problems with sexual addiction. I would say in the average church, across a broad theological spectrum, the estimate is that roughly 2/3 of the men are dealing with this, and roughly 1/3 of the women, like I was talking about just a minute ago. How many of those people are talking about it? Less than 5%, probably.
Wow, okay.
Yeah. It's a huge problem of silence in the church about this, and you look at, this is not my time to get off on church leadership, but I would say across a very wide ecumenical spectrum, there are virtually very few churches safely talking about sexuality, the problems of sexual addiction, the problems of sexual abuse, and so forth.